bringing together the various groups in the village. And I've got a bit of a blurb here, so to make sure I cover everything, I'm going to just read it out. It's a network of individuals, community groups, local businesses and councillors in Ensham and the surrounding parishes, dedicated to understanding, protecting and restoring our local nature in all its diversity. This bottom-up approach aims at connecting enthusiasts with experts and businesses and councillors, all living in the same local area, to enable a scaling up of nature recovery in the face of climate and ecological crisis. And there's a website which I think Lucy will share if you want more information on what the Nature Recovery Network is. There's also a Facebook page which is full of lovely photographs and information on there. So if you use Facebook, that's a good place. And Lucy is posting all of these wonderful tiny talks onto the YouTube channel as well, so you can watch them later. And I know that my family in Australia have been watching them later, because obviously this timing is not great. It's a bit early for my mum to get up, but she's really been enjoying them later. So without any further ado, this evening's talk, as I said, is about Willow. A little bit of background on Andy first. So I actually first met Andy through a willow, but not a tree kind. His daughter Willow is the same age as my daughter, so we met when they started going to nursery together. So we've known each other quite a long time because they're 13 years old now. And during that time, I've seen Andy's sort of love of willow weaving develop from something I think he learned about 30 years ago from a bloke in Norfolk, is about as much info as I could get on that, and has been developing and refining his skill. And a couple of years ago, he met with Charlotte at Hill End at a course that they did together. And that has now evolved into something that we will be seeing more of, I imagine, around the village. And if any of you have wandered down the high street, you'll see some of the aesthetic pieces that Andy has made adorning the windows of what used to be Cornucopia. Charlotte and Paul are designers. They have a company in Ensham called Road Designers, and they make interiors. And this, I think, is a kind of homage to their love of nature as well. So over to you both. I think it's Charlotte first, isn't it, to talk us through?
Sure. Hi, thanks very much, Renee. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about a project that we're doing. We've called it Willow Coppice. And this is a project by Andy, Paul Turner, and myself, Charlotte Holmes. We're all artist makers, and 1 year ago, we connected via Ensham Nature Recovery Network. And we immediately decided to create a project together for three principal reasons: to grow coppice and forage willow and wood, to make sustainable artwork, including basketry. Secondly, to create habitat, improve biodiversity, and as a response to the respond to the climate crisis in the process. And thirdly, we wanted to connect with people, encourage them to grow and make and create a community and weave together their knowledge and skills and stories. So our project threads its way through cultivation, carbon capture, and community collaboration. And it takes in some ancient practices. The prehistoric craft of basketry has arguably developed ever since somebody wanted to carry more than two objects, and the practice of coppicing, which is growing and cutting wood for regeneration. And this is the oldest known form of woodland management. It's evidenced for more than 8,000 years. So we're drawing on these historic branches, and we're drawing on the knowledge and the skills of other people as well, a fantastic community of interested people who've given us saplings to plant and spaces or land or labour to plant them in, and who've taught us new skills along the way, as well as shared their stories with us. So now over to Andy, who's going to share the story of how this all came together over the past year.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm just going to stand up as I talk. So as Renee said, I don't know if you can see very well, the lighting's not great. As Renee said, I've been making baskets for 30 years, and that's on and off. Very much off when I've got lots of children in the house, and I have 4 children in the house, so, and one of them is called Willow. So I would say it's often off, because when you make a basket, you need time, you need focus, and you need to really have a lot of peace and quiet And my house, if you know me, with 4 kids, doesn't often have peace and quiet. They are peace and quiet at the moment, but not very often. So making a basket, it's a singular process. You focus and you relax and you start weaving and you start bending. Now, I'm trying to multitask. And the reason I'm multitasking is because basket making it's a sociable thing. You can chit chat, you can carry on and talk as you do it. And each time you put in a willow, you're bending it, you're weaving it, and you're creating more and more tension. Each twist and each turn adds to the tension that you're building. So you keep going. And as you create tension, you create strength. And I'm doing this too quickly, I think. And it's opening up. That's disappointing because I've done about 10 in the last few weeks. That is really disappointing. So I'm going to show you the one I did earlier, and I have done 10 earlier. So I'm rushing too much. I'm trying to tell a story at the same time. But as you weave and you make baskets, you do get in a sort of zone where you can relax. Trying to talk and present at the same time is a bit tricky. But you do get in a zone, and you start to sort of get an opportunity to think and to talk and to chat. And what you find is, as you sit with other basket makers, you start just talking about life and things that are going on, and you tell stories. And our talk today is about stories and about what we've been doing the last year. So Charlotte, Paul and I really first met a year ago, even though I'd met Charlotte earlier, and we got together and we decided to do some things. So I'll start sharing my screen and show you what we started to do. So we set out with 4 objectives. The first thing was to make baskets. So here's a basket I made a while ago. It's an asymmetric rope twist. And to make other things, in situ things, so things in the village you may have seen, fences, arches, wreaths in windows. Anything with willow or anything with hazel and natural wood. And the next objective, as Charlotte said, is about nature. It's about looking at biodiversity, the environment, how we can plant and grow, protect and improve nature. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is community. Making baskets on your own is not as good as working together with other people. So building a community of people who want to do things, planting, coppicing, cutting wood, making baskets, just hanging out, chatting, having conversations, and forming a network. So let's go and talk about what we've done and what we've been doing in the first year. There's 4 main categories of what we've been doing. The first is growing, then making, volunteering, and then teaching. So growing, I'm not expecting you to read this, but we've been finding plots of land, gardens, places like the Peace Oak, Finstock, where we managed to get a larger plot of land, Freeland, where we found a forest that we can coppice hazel. So planting willow on a large scale, harvesting hazel in a large scale, but also microcoppicing, finding a garden and planting 1 willow, finding existing willows, existing hazels and cutting them. So gradually we're locating more and more locations and planting more and more willow and hazel. The benefit of growing is we can harvest it, but it's also helping nature. And then the making, for fun, over Christmas, we started making a few things around the village. As I think Renee said, there's a creation opposite Cornucopia. I'm next door to the DIY. There's one in the Newlands. and a few others around the village. And then volunteering, cutting, planting, maintaining. Even Renee and Kerry got arm twisted and started carrying bundles of hazel furze at Freelands Wood. So the volunteering is a key part. We've had lots of helpers, and we'll tell you more about that in the rest of the story. And finally, teaching. Sadly, teaching hasn't happened last year, but we're looking to have some evening workshops in the summer at Peace Oak. So all of that weaves together. We add a bit of tension when we add people and get them working together. But in the end, that tension sorts itself out in the same way as you sort yourself out making a basket, and we create a community. We help nature, the environment and biodiversity, and we've got a network of wonderful people. So I'm going to hand back to Charlotte.
I'm going to talk about how we're growing. So we are growing willow in a few different spaces, including, as many of you will know, at the Peace Oak in Ensham. And from there, we owe a heartfelt thanks to Raymond of Peace Oak for an introduction to Paul at Wood Farm in Finstock, who had a bit of spare field. So we drove over there to look at the site, and it was a freezing cold day. It was sleeting, and the field was full of tussocks and mainly underwater. We were disproportionately excited. So through this introduction, we took on Paul's field or bog, and we developed what we're calling a Microcopist Model, which is a sustainable model of coppicing and growing willow and wood for use, whilst, as we said, allowing nature to thrive on the same site. So what we've done is we've densely planted willow, grown to create long straight rods for use in basketry, alongside a micro orchard of apples and pears and quince and plums, and surrounded the whole site with edible hedgerows and native trees, including lots of hazel for future coppicing. Young woods like this and microforests, sometimes they're called tiny forests, mop up masses and masses of carbon as they grow. They're just full of vigor, and they create wonderful spaces of habitat and biodiversity out of the most unpromising of, potential ground or land. If we next, in the past year, at this particular site, we've planted over 2,500 willows and saplings. Our original stocks of willow were in their own way a story. Many of them were foraged, some from Katrina at Longmead here in Ensham. Some were gifted from White Wood's Hill End. And importantly, the microcopis and the hazels, and that's the hedgerows and the orchard saplings, were all created through donated saplings. As people heard about the project, I would get offers of trees, or sometimes just left on my doorstep. Many of them were from Derek Mallin, Raymond Evans and Paul Tomlin. And this just made the creation of this coppice incredibly magical. A friend sent seeds in the post. Another gave us snowdrops in clumps. And these gifted initial plantings were then further supplemented by a grant from the Woodland Trust, and more varieties of willow, which we bought from an organic grower called Claire Shivlock at Warwickshire Willows. There's space in the middle of this site for making and doing, and for chatting around a fire. And the project itself is about creating a space for making and doing. We've been given handmade tools. We've been given seating. A friend called Richard Dixon made us benches and a table to work at. What we hope is that in 2021, this space can be populated better through short courses and through skill sharing. Next. Our coppice principle also includes creating micro meadows and allowing a variety of grasses and wildflowers to flourish, to provide habitat and this incredibly rich source of food for a variety of insects and little mammals. This helps all the species up the food chain, from blue tits to barn owls. And of course, I'm aware of this is also a subject of which there is great wisdom and expertise in the audience here together today already. So I won't go any further other than to say that over the course of the summer, watching the meadow unfurling, and it was just the most enormous pleasure. And also that I think those beetles might be red soldier beetles. I think, of course, not all of this was actually by design. Due to lockdown, some of the setting up that we did wasn't actually quite the community event we hoped. However, we have very sincerely appreciated help from long-suffering family members. I think probably each and every one of them would say that the highlight of the summer was hand cutting the meadow with shears, because we hadn't yet bought a scythe. And that was on one of the hottest days of the year. And I think they can all say it as their least favourite contribution to the project. Next, we have something about Willow. So I just wanted to briefly talk about Willow, because it really is a wonderwood. It has long been used for medicine. It's been incorporated into myth and ritual since time immemorial. It was one of Shakespeare's favourite tropes of romantic love. Monet loved to paint it. William Morris rendered it in wallpaper. And willow ware china is the most popular pattern of dishware of all time. It's also amazingly useful. You can use it for basketry, for fence making, lobster creels, coracles, riverbank stabilisation, as a biofuel, and even for house building. It's a food plant for caterpillars, and its lovely early catkins in early spring, which presage Easter, provide nectar for bees and moths. Although its genus Salix derives from the Celtic sal for near and lis for water, it has long thrived across the globe, from river valleys to deserts. Willow's a bit miraculous because it can reproduce vegetatively, which is that like a twig can break off, and if it encounters soil and water, it might put down roots and just spring into new life. And this extraordinary life force was once thought to be transmissible for humans, which is why it's long been held so special and sacred in our imaginations. So the history of willow aside, there is easily more than 500 willows varieties. So they'll range from enormous trees to tiny little Arctic varieties. And there's so many different shapes and colours. We've started off with 6 varieties, just selected for their use in basketry and hurdling or fencing. And they've got this beautiful colour range from red, green, bright orange, purple, and this particular one a deep brown. And we're also currently collecting and planting new varieties to harvest next year. And the next slide will just show us what the rods look like when they're ready to harvest, which is each year a rod may grow between 3 foot and 16 foot high, depending on the variety. And it's coppiced to the ground each winter with some important set aside for the pollinators, obviously. The planting season for willow is roughly the same as the coppicing season, after the leaves drop off sometime in November and before they begin to bud up again in April. Willow, as I said before, it really wants to grow. All you need to do to grow a willow is to push a 12-inch rod into the ground the right way up, and it will, and hope it rains. And its energy for growth is just miraculous. So this is an example of our Microcopist system. It's a scalable system. We can maxi-coppice or mini-coppice. The ethos fits any shape or size of space, and the harvested material will be used to make living willow sculptures, for basketry-based installations, for green woodworking, community projects, and for teaching. And all the while that we've been doing this, people keep surprising us with their capacity to invent new projects, to inspire us with their ideas, to help us learn more skills and to contribute their time and knowledge. So I'll hand back to Andy.
Thank you. Lovely. So moving to volunteering. Now, this was a challenge. Charlotte showed you those lovely, slim, thin basketry willows. Voss at Park Cottage, I got a call from his wife we've got some willow we've cut, and the willows that were cut were 20, 30 foot long and not very bendable, not very slender, and not very pretty. But we got volunteers, we got helpers, and we managed with COVID to cut them, sort them, size them, and then transport them over to Peace Oak. They were an ugly bunch of willows, should we say. We got helpers, and we separated and did one at a time and started building a fence. Hazels went in first, and luckily the soil is very soft and they went in quite deep. And then we tried to bend the willow, and the biggest ones would not bend. And as I've said, you've got to create tension when you're creating a fence, a basket, or anything, and you need to bend your willow. And it was bending in the end. When you did bend it, it would be so strong it would snap or be dangerous. So we got smaller and smaller and managed to start bending some of the willows, and finding that if you wrap a willow around a few posts, you can start to bend it in. So we managed to get a form and a bit of character and a bit of movement in the fence. And so I think with the ugliest willows going, we had fun, and probably about 15 different people got involved in this fence. So that's one example of volunteering. Another was we've been given permission at Vincent's Wood in Freeland to coppice the wood. So coppicing means taking a portion of the wood. Here we've got 30 or 40 trees, cutting them down, clearing the light, opening the space for the light to get in. Dormant seeds that have not been doing anything should, come the spring, sprout up with a mass of biodiversity. Normally in the wood, the only thing you're going to see is hazel and bluebells. Beautiful, but nothing else. So we should this spring see beautiful plants coming up. Now also it gives space for the oaks, the larches that you can see in the background, for their seeds to take root, to germinate. Currently, you don't get any new standards. You've only got the big ones. So hopefully we will see and try and identify and protect any saplings that come. And finally, with the hazel, we made baskets, an odd sort of basket, but they're there to protect a hazel that we've laid. So we've laid a hazel down so that it will root. We put a hazel basket around it to protect from the deer, and that's a habitat. We've created habitats for animals and wildlife, because the other thing with the Freeland Wood is there isn't really much habitat. It's all very tidy. So we've created a bit of neat mess and habitat for the wildlife. And also we've harvested material that we're using, as we saw in Peace Oak. So it's a win-win-win. And now to making. This is my favorite piece. And this is, I feel like I inspired and prodded Ross into a piece of log art. So the willow that he was left with, some of it was so big we couldn't do anything with, it's for burning. But he's made these beautiful waves that you can see in Park Cottage on Oxford Road as you leave the village. And this is really just an example of some of the things you can see around the village that we're working on. We've got lots and lots of ideas, we've got lots of materials, and we've also got lots of volunteers for things in their houses. So you will see more around the village. And then finally back to Wood Farm. This is the first harvest and a picture of the willows that we cut. And for me, this is sort of the most exciting time. It's like the first wine from your first grapes and the first taste. We have a lot of material now, varying sizes of willows and hazels, and we're excited to start making and getting volunteers. So the question is, how can you get involved if you like to get involved? As we said, we're growing, we're making, we're volunteering, and we're teaching. You can volunteer, you can cut, you can maintain, you can plant, you can help in the things that we've been showing you. If you've got a garden or a plot, you can grow willow. We can set up a microcopist. We can plant one willow and manage it and cut it for you. You may want to make a donation to buy trees or willows. You may want to commission a piece of work, or you may want to learn yourself. So we're going to be setting up a summer evening workshop at Peace Oak, along with David Knight, who's doing spoon carving and green woodworking. And finally, you can join our community and help nature and help build a community. That's the end of our talk. So thank you. We're now questions and answers, hopefully answers.
I think a few questions have come into the chat, Andy. So, oh, no, they haven't. It's all just people expressing their love. Their love and inspiration is coming through.
Everyone's muted.
But please do pop questions into the chat and then I can filter through anything that comes through. To get us started while we're waiting, Kerry was just asking, when you cut the fresh willow, does it need to be used immediately? Will it go hard and then be less malleable? Or
if you cut willow, it's called green willow, whatever colour it is. And if you leave it a week or two, you can use it immediately. But whatever you make, it will then shrink. The willow is full of water. The weight of a bundle of willow when it's cut is really heavy. So whatever you make will shrink. So you can use it for outdoor projects while it's green, but typically you dry it for 6 months, you leave it to dry, and then after 6 months, you can then use it by re-soaking it a day per foot.
Oh.
And then you can use it after it's nice and soft again. And that's when you make baskets. It's dried and re-soaked. Yeah. Cool.
I have a practical question, because I know that you have 4 very busy young children and you have a very busy wife and you've got a job, and I'm wondering how on earth you make time for this, because clearly this has been a huge investment in time.
It's been hard. I mean, I think lockdown gave me a couple of weeks where I just went crazy and made a lot of things, and my father died, and Charlotte and Paul kicked me out of the house and made me go to Finstock and plant willow, and it was healthy. It was a way to get through, but it's tricky. That's why I think it's nice to form a network and to get a community and to work with other people, because you can't do everything on your own. And it's actually what we've achieved is by getting helpers and volunteers. And I think with Charlotte and Paul and ourselves, energizing each other, pushing each other, I think on your own, we wouldn't have done anything.
Charlotte, I don't know if you've got anything, or Paul, you want to add to that. We're coming up to time, but.
No, I just, that's very, very true. I think it is, you really have to push each other along, and I think that's really helpful, actually.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's probably, oh, there we go. We've got some volunteers coming through. Results.
Well, can I just say, I'm going to set a quick shout out. There's 2 weeks left this year to plant willow and hazel and saplings. So it's a massive push. If anybody's got any free time next weekend or the weekend after, it's the last chance until the next growing season.
And our website is willowcoppice.co.uk.
Very good at sharing a whole load of enthusiastic follow-up links after these things.
Great.
Hopefully that would be great. And a tip, if you are coming to help out, because we learnt this the hard way being proper townies, we didn't bring any equipment when we came to help us. So make sure you find out from Andy or Charlotte what you need to bring so that you can actually be useful, because otherwise you feel like a bit of a tip. All right, I think the last thing to say is that Sue Rakes is doing the Tiny Talk tomorrow, and that is on edible encham, which I'm so excited about. We've got some wild garlic growing across the road and I'm holding out to try and pick that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Sue has to say. And just thanks everyone again for joining in. And thanks Andy and Charlotte for a wonderful talk, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.